Human trafficking has been a big epidemic in Houston, Harris County, and in Fort Bend, and we thought it would be important to have this panel discussion because there's so much interest in this area. We have our incredible district attorney from Harris County, Kim Ogg, Brian Middleton from Fort Bend, Khara Breeden with Texas Forensic Nursing, and our commander, Jim Dale, who will be talking about human trafficking.
That's great.
Okay, so the first question is to Kim Ogg. Why are prosecution of traffickers so important?
Because nobody ever wanted to be a prostitute. That is not a profession or a life that anybody could want. It's not that people don't voluntarily participate at some point, but we are recalculating, I think, the way we think about prostitution and the victims involved. And those who traffic for money. And so when the motive is clear and it's monetary and the result is damaging, as it is in human trafficking, it's important that the law respond. That becomes a public safety threat.
To Commander Jim Dale, what is law enforcement doing to take the lead on arresting and changing traffickers in this region?
One, we need you folks out there. So what we've done is we have a Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance. We call it HATRA. It's part of our Human Trafficking Unit with the Houston Police Department. And what we have done with federal money and state money and other funds, we've come together with we have Fort Bend County, Montgomery County, Harris County, other surrounding law enforcement agencies, as long as victim assistance, in order to work together to tackle the issue of human trafficking. We have staff from Ms. Ogg's office have been fantastic as far as helping us prosecute these traffickers and rescuing these women. We know this isn't a law enforcement problem. We know this is an all-around community problem, and you can't have one without the other, so we need our victim groups, our citizens to come out there and help us. And with this HATRA unit, we can get a call. Time is of the essence when it comes to rescuing a victim. We can get a call, get out there immediately with the funds and the resources that we have without waiting, without phone calls, and take care of that. And then from that point, we get the victim the resources that she or he needs to get over this and get through this with hope. And then we also have Ms. Ogg's office and other DAs that we work with as far as putting these traffickers in jail.
For District Attorney Brian Middleton, what does the future of trafficking investigation prosecutions look like?
The future that I see is that we will have a society that will not tolerate human exploitation. What we have in HATRA is that the Houston Trafficking Rescue Alliance is a number of different agencies working together to combat the problem, and that's the way it will continue to develop. We work closely with each other to train, because these cases are complicated. It requires a trained professional to look at these cases and to drill down into them so we can prosecute the cases effectively. They're not easy to prosecute, but with the right training, we can eradicate the problem, and that requires that we work together with different agencies and support groups so that we can eradicate the problem. It won't happen without this extra effort. So my office is committed to committing resources and providing training so we can have the biggest impact. In particular in my county, who a lot of people are in denial about it, we're not in denial about it. And in fact, we've been building up resources to combat the problem. And I have a couple of people here with me tonight, Chad Bridges and Lydia Johnson. Lydia Johnson is part of my transition team, and Chad Bridges is our domestic violence chief, along with a number of different people in my office that are working very hard to combat this problem.
Khara, what evidence related to trafficking can be gathered during a forensic exam? And how does that evidence further trafficking investigations? And just related to that, how are forensic nurses trained to deal with trafficking victims? And do forensic nurses attempt to establish rapport with potential trafficking victims?
So I think I'll start with just the defining forensic nursing, because I think that's kind of a thing out there. Not really very many people know what I do exactly. In fact, our housekeeping doesn't like to come into our office because she thinks we have to have dead bodies in there, which is not the case. Just throwing that one out there. But really, forensic nursing, we're really integral in the intersection between interpersonal violence, whatever type of violence that is, and the legal system, whether that be the DA's office or law enforcement. And it's really crucial that these victims are seen by a forensic nurse, just because we are able to sit down with them, meet the patient where they're at, really spend the time that needs to be taken so that we can understand everything that went into that incident and help start collecting that evidence. So when we can really take a deep dive, collect really good evidence that goes to law enforcement, the DA's office, they can build better cases, and they can help the community for a longer time with this type of medical forensic exam. So forensic nursing in general, we all start out as nurses. We always focus on health and welfare of our patient. But when you talk about a forensic nurse, we have at least 80 additional hours of training that have gone into just understanding dynamics of violence. How does it impact a person? Understanding how people get into that place. I once took care of, she came in as a prostitute, and I spent some time with her really trying to understand where she came from. And I asked her, because I built that relationship with her at that point, how did this start? How did this start for you? And she said, well, when I was 9, my mom needed me to go and have sex for money to help pay the bills. And at that moment in my nursing career, I realized very quickly that people aren't born broken. Typically, there's some other factor that helps in that process. And so from the nursing profession, we've been the most trusted profession for the past 17 years. And so if you take that trust and that ability to really care for a patient, and you are able to give of yourself to that patient or victim at that moment, we can really not only help on a pathway of healing and recovery for the patient, but we can also really help the community in general by providing all the things that need to happen for that case.
Kim, how is your agency working to combat trafficking and support the victims' trafficking crimes?
Well, we're the 3rd biggest county in the country. So the answer is it takes people to help people. We have expanded through grant funding the victim services portion of our office. It's really swelled from a constant of about 8 for over 20 years to now over 60 people, including our social workers, our victims assistance service providers, and the lawyers assigned. It's a remarkable shift for Harris County, and it's purposeful. And I came wanting to do that. And fortunately, there were other leaders in the state that wanted to fund victim services, and so those grant funds were indispensable. But they are not permanent funding, and it is important to remember that change has to be permanently funded to last. So we upped our victim services, but we also took a different approach to prosecuting prostitution. Because of the new trauma-informed way that we are learning works better in our criminal justice system, if we utilize that rather than sort of a simplistic black and white, so-and-so broke the law, therefore they should be punished approach, very simplistic approach. So we're dealing with the prostitutes themselves differently through a program that we hope will get them out of the life. And the program is really wraparound services delivered by and through caseworkers at Hawk, who don't provide the wraparound services. They do the initial assessment and try and understand what the person's problems, what the source really is. And this child abuse situation is the most common trauma that I've seen. When it comes to offenders, traffickers were typically not prosecuted. I know that seems strange. You heard Brian say how difficult these cases are to prosecute. Part of the reason is the prostitutes themselves. They sometimes believe they're in love with the individuals, sometimes they're financially dependent, sometimes they're physically dependent upon drugs provided by the trafficker or the pimp. But the pimp and the trafficker's motives are money, not best interest of the prostitute, not love. This is all about money. That makes it easy for us to focus our attention on the chain of criminality. We've moved up the chain. It seems fruitless to continually put the prostitutes in jail only to have them return to the street to prostitution. And to do it in increasingly larger sentences also seems pointless if it's not going to fix anything. But prosecuting the pimps and the traffickers who exploit these individuals for money makes perfect sense. And so I want to answer the evidentiary question because it's really interesting. The phone that you carry is State's Exhibit 1. In most criminal investigations now, the phone contains the most evidence of the crime, in that the communications between the pimps and the traffickers are often on the phone. The locations that the prostitute has been with the pimps and traffickers may be on the phone. The communications to other promoters or Backpage or different advertisers is often on the phone. So the arrest of the prostitute yields the phone in the prostitute's possession. The arrest culminates in a fairly quick release because bail reform has ensured that for misdemeanor offenders, they're, for the most part, living on PR bonds. We hope that they are being sent to Hawk. We know that when the accused comes to court, we are diverting them to Hawk. But the night in jail yields the phone. If we get a search warrant, we look in the phone. And that's how we're making cases up the criminal chain. And so our focus, I know it's a really long answer, but it's important because Brian and I are really trying to come up with synonymous policies and programs so that we can have a regional impact. And so the result is that we're prosecuting a much greater number of actual traffickers and pimps through evidence obtained from the prostitutes themselves, who may or may not be willing as witnesses to assist. But we can often come up with enough independent evidence to charge regardless of the victim, and keeping the victims from being under the pressure of either us trying to get them to testify or the pimp or the trafficker trying to get them not to testify is going to be more and more dependent on the independent evidence that we can get from the victim, which also includes the physical evidence, especially in sexual assault cases, but often in prostitution cases of beatings, let's say, that the prostitutes took. So the forensic nurses collect a much broader sample of evidence that's usable in court than a regular hospital would.
Thank you so much. Commander Dale, how do vice officers determine prostitution sellers are victims of trafficking? And why and how does HPD work with forensic nurse teams like TXFNE?
Okay. How do we determine if one engaged in prostitution is a victim? And I think piggybacking what Ms. Ogg said and Mr. Middleton, this is the hardest crime to prosecute. This is the hardest crime to find. As we've stated before, they identify with their traffickers. These traffickers have terrorized them. They've threatened their family members, their kids, their siblings. So they don't, at first they don't want to, they're not going to come out. We call it an outcry, where they'll come out and say, yes, I'm being trafficked. We really, very few times will we see that right at the scene. But usually it takes time to get them off the street, to work with the attorneys and work with the victim groups. And they might come out and say, I was trafficked weeks, months, even years later. But we want to keep that relationship going with these women because we want to put those traffickers, once that woman's gone, the trafficker's just going to go find another victim. And so we take it upon ourselves to make sure that the victims, the women that we come across and that are victims in this crime are taken care of. We don't want to put them in jail because, as we've stated before, they're not out there willingly. So what we want to do is work with them and work with the victim resource groups that we do, or organizations, to get with them and make sure that, hey, they're getting the care and hope and resources they need to get through this ordeal. And then hopefully they come back and say, hey, this guy was trafficking, this guy was my trafficker or my pimp. So it's just a lot of interviewing. I've got some of the best folks that I've ever met that are compassionate folk. They don't do this for the money. They don't do this as a job. They really care because this is a 60 to 80 hour work week they work. They work all weekend. They did a fantastic job with the kidnapping ring just a couple days ago. I couldn't be prouder of them, but they work with these victims, and some of my investigators will continue to contact them throughout the process to make sure that they're getting everything that they need to lead a productive life, as well as hoping that they come through and say, hey, this is the person that's trafficking me. And again, we had 2 juveniles that we worked an operation that came forward and said, this guy's trafficking me, please help me. So it does happen. What we do with Khara and her organization has been great. With a forensic nurse now, it's, before if we had a victim had been sexually assaulted or engaged in trafficking, you have to get a patrol unit, they transport the woman down to the hospital, the emergency room, and if you've ever been in those places, there's a lot of hectic activity, there's a lot of folks there, it's very invasive, it's very abrupt and abrasive. With Khara's folks, we can do an operation to target traffickers and rescue victims, and she will come out, the nurses will come out to the scene with us. And so if we have the victim there, it'll just be her or a couple other nurses. They can look at the victim, they can see the victim without anybody else around, offer them the help that they need without the transporting. So it's efficient, it's effective, and it helps ease the victimization of what this woman's already been going through.
Khara, can traffickers be given a forensic exam by forensic nurses with proper search warrants? And under what circumstances, and why is this helpful to trafficking investigations?
So really all that is kind of a suspect exam. So yes, the answer to that is yes. As you guys all sit here and today, you're gonna leave something behind and you're gonna take something with you. That's really called Locard's principle, and really that's, when you talk about evidence collection, that's really what we're talking about. So when we have a trafficker, he or she can likely have evidence on their person as well. So a suspect exam or an exam on the trafficker himself or herself certainly is a way to also collect evidence. Obviously, like you said, we definitely would need an appropriate search warrant unless they're going to consent for that exam, which does happen at times. I've done suspect exams before where they do consent for the exam, but otherwise, yes, we would definitely need a search warrant for that.
Brian, how can the incorporation of medical forensic evidence support more effective prosecution of trafficking in Fort Bend County?
The answer is simple. The addition of forensic examinations will only enhance what we do. One of the things about victims of human trafficking is that these human traffickers, these criminals, are very, very sophisticated. They tend to manipulate their victims and convince them that they have no way out. Or if they try to turn against them, that they will suffer some irreparable harm or injury. So if you have a forensic nurse getting involved very quickly, especially after, in law we call excited utterances, but right after a trauma, where they've been hurt, they were more likely to explain to a medical expert what happened and how they got their injuries. So having that information and having that readily available helps us to build cases against human traffickers. Another problem is that we have to be trained on the signs to look for. So when we have medical experts getting involved in what may look like a simple assault or may look like or ordinary rape, may then, after examination and speaking with a trained forensic nurse, may be able to uncover some of the factors that may lead to a prosecution. In fact, in Fort Bend County, we're training all county employees on the signs to look for, including code enforcement officers and ultimately sanitation workers, so they can be aware of signs to look for so they can report it to law enforcement officials so we can get closer to the criminals involved.
Khara, one question to you. How do you see the future of forensic exam, and can you maybe walk us through how you work in conjunction with police enforcement in a situation like this?
So Texas Forensic Nurse Examiners was established in May of 2018, and we launched and began seeing patients in March of this year. And so our goal from the beginning has been to meet patients where they're at. It's not to make them jump through 5 hoops to find the right place to go. We want to integrate ourselves into the community and into these services that best meet the victim's needs. And so when we talk about human trafficking specifically, that's working with groups like Commander Dale to be present in operations if that's what the operation needs us to do. It's also, we had a patient come to our office on Richmond Avenue last night at midnight for an exam. So the patients are easily integrated into our office space. It's very calm, serene. There's nobody else there except for, the advocate and the nurse and the patient. And so we really just focus on the patient and getting them to that next place, what their needs are versus all of the other things. So when we talk about trafficking, it's really just making ourselves available and being creative with wherever we need to be. With us being mobile, it gives us the opportunity to really be where we need to be for those victims.
I'd like to ask each of you, if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes, seeing how you think we can at least diminish this problem that we have and how we can all work together.
Well, we prosecutors have a saying, follow the money. And lawyers on both sides of the bar are good at that, both the criminal bench, judge, the criminal bar and the civil bar. And not only can we take people's liberty, that definitely hurts, but it can become, Captain Dale and all of us will tell you, a cost of doing business for criminals. And if the profit's great enough, then, a few days in jail or a few months, sometimes even a few years may be worth the benefit that they reap, the profit that they gain. So I think that working with the civil bar, I see some friends from different firms that are now prosecuting civilly those who aid in human trafficking. And the examples that I've seen in lawsuits are hotels, motels, truck stops, the back page, and other businesses which are legitimate that support human trafficking. I wouldn't even agree that it's controversial. I would say that this is a legitimate tort that can be prosecuted civilly. I think criminally we do a much better service to our community if we really try and go after the folks who are profiting. We treat the women, we go after the people who are profiting, and then the buyers, that's another issue. And there's a lot of pressure, no probation, jail time. Well, I will submit that this is the oldest profession in the world, and that the buyers of it are probably the oldest consumers in the world, not these particular, but that is an area where we can have an impact. Some people believe in sort of shaming the buyers by publishing their pictures. Suing is another angle, and then prosecuting and jailing. So I think the combination of those deterrents really does make an impression on people. Not only embarrassment, but jailing, the loss of money, not just profits, but perhaps your original investment. These things can change social ills. It can't necessarily eliminate them, but we can hurt them. And when they're not supported by the public, example, gosh, he's a really great guy. I know he did this, he purchased from a prostitute, he bought sex from a prostitute, or he was there for prostitution, but he's a really great guy. You're gonna really hurt his family if you send him to jail, convict him, give him probation, etc. So I think that it's up to the community to help tell us, how far do you want us to go? Where do we cross over from being helpful to harmful? And that the community standards really do matter when it comes to your public tax-paid response that law enforcement provides. Because we're going to enforce the laws that are on the books, and prostitution is on the books. Promotion of prostitution is on the books. But we have a lot of discretion in how we handle it. So I see a multi-layered approach that focuses on taking the profit out of human trafficking.
I concur wholeheartedly. It's gonna take the whole community. This is a problem that crosses socioeconomic lines. It's a problem that crosses genders. Even our little boys in our community are victims of human trafficking. And so, yeah, we have to take an aggressive approach to this problem. And if anyone, I know I'm speaking to the choir right now, but if anyone is in denial about whether or not the problem exists, I'm here to tell you it does. It's real. It's frightening. They're recruiting in our schools, and anyone's child is a potential victim. So this is a war that we must fight. Some would say it's a difficult war, but that's not any justification for not applying every means necessary to try to eradicate it. So just like I said, in our county, we're educating all county employees on the signs to look for so we can increase reporting. Even investigators in my office are assigned to the task force with HCDAO and are working very hard to investigate these crimes. So I can assure you what you're looking at right now is a formidable force in this region. We're working together and we're putting all our efforts into eradicating the problem, and we need your assistance. When you're aware or you become concerned about something, don't be afraid to report it. We'll investigate it and determine whether or not it is human trafficking, but don't be afraid to report something that you think is suspicious. We also have labor trafficking. If you see any of these signs, let us know so we can get involved.
I think from the medical side, and my responsibility from our nonprofit organization is to just make sure that every exam that we do on a victim, no matter what they see us for, is held to best practice standards. Our evidence is of the utmost integrity. And by doing that and really exploring the injuries, like Brian said, they might be here for an exam because they are a victim of trafficking, but maybe they were strangled. And maybe that would be an easier way for his group to be able to prosecute that case if we have good strangulation evidence versus this trafficking case that may be a little bit more difficult. And so for us to do our jobs really efficiently and to assess every injury and everything that the patient arrives to us with, gives them the tools that they need to carry forward and help protect the community and the patient as well. So from our standpoint, really just making sure that we're within the community, we're doing what we need to help meet those needs, and we're doing everything by best practice standards so that everything is in great shape when it comes to being needed in the courtroom.
Just talking from a law enforcement perspective, look, trafficking is the #2 biggest criminal enterprise we're dealing with. #1 being narcotics. But in a few years, trafficking would overtake narcotics. Because as narcotics, you have a fixed commodity. Once that's gone, it's over. Plus, you get caught with the drugs, it's pretty, there's no explanation. I hate to do this, but if I'm the trafficker and Khara's the victim, and I, as a law enforcement, come across them on a scene, on a call, or a traffic stop, this is my girlfriend, this is my wife, in the past, we'd let them go and that's it, and now you've just, that's been the trafficking situation that's gone to the wayside. But on our end, we're educating our folks here at the Houston Police Department, and I know Harris County is doing the same thing. We're trying to educate all our law enforcement personnel on what to look for when you're on the scene. So that training and education component is just going to get bigger and bigger. We're expanding our Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance. We're getting, as far as logistics space, it's getting bigger. We've added, we work well with Fort Bend County, Montgomery County. We've added Brazoria and Galveston County in the next coming months. We have our forensic nurse group that we're working with, and we're adding more victim advocates. So it's just going to get bigger, and with more people involved, such as you folks there, we're going to actually hopefully diminish this crime. And I think a big part of that is just doing these kind of things, educating the folks, creating changing the cultural perception of what a victim is, what prostitution is, and as Ms. Ogg stated, looking at the demand side. As Mr. Middleton pointed out, our young men are victims too, but not in the sense of, as we see in prostitution. Young men, there is a demand side. Where is this coming from? People have correlated to, looking at pornography and things of that nature. We have to, as a single dad, working with my son and my daughter, is, hey, this isn't all right. working with my son saying, hey, this is how you treat a woman with respect and dignity, and however you want to do that, just get involved. Everybody sits there and says, hey, I want to do something more, and there's some great group and organizations out there. You know, where you can also write your legislators and get involved that way. We have some folks out here that do that. You can get involved with, you know, children and youth because they come from a situation, whether it's big brothers and sisters, they come from a situation where they entered this lifestyle not on their own. So when people say, I really want to get involved and whatnot, and you just go home and do nothing, that's not what we're looking at. It's just going to get bigger. This problem, you know, is everybody says Houston's the hub of human trafficking. I don't think we're the hub because I don't think you can compare it to anywhere else. But I do think people focus on this so much because we have some great, the folks that you see up here, we're at the top in the country as far as solution-based policing and advocating for victims and prosecuting of traffickers. So when people say we're the hub, it's not because we have more traffickers or more victims, because we're out there doing something, and as my end, I'm making sure we market that and let everybody know that this crime is taken seriously down here in Houston.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to questions for this incredible panel.
Is there a program or an area of the United States that's implemented something like what you're doing here and been successful, and where is it, and what did you learn from them?
So the prevention, or it's I wouldn't characterize it, this is the wrong word, the intervention that we're proposing with the sellers, I think is a hybrid of various best practices. Most folks would understand that prostitution is generally the way somebody is supporting themselves after they've fallen into hard times for whatever reason, sexual abuse, drug addiction, homelessness, a lot of reasons. So the wraparound, the concept of finding out what the source of the trauma is and the other problems that are blocking their re-entry into lawful society, I think those best practices, we've kind of put together a hybrid. Now, the forensic nursing element, I have not seen done elsewhere. Dr. Breeden will have to tell us if that's as unique and is, if we're as fortunate as I think we are. But the notion of having SANEs, specially trained nurses available in a non-traumatic hospital setting, especially during a day and time when hospitals are turning rape victims away because they don't have this asset of a sexual assault nurse. It's a huge benefit. I don't know if other people in the country are doing it, but the idea of wraparound services, getting to the source of the problem through a multitude of kind of an array of available service providers, referenced by a hub like HAWK, the Houston Area Women's Center. That's pretty common, I think. You might find it in different cities, maybe executed in slightly different ways, but the forensic nursing part, I think, is quite unique. So let me give it to Khara.
When I sat down and tried to figure out what Houston needed and what services needed, where they needed to be, I really did have to take, I hate to steal your word, a hybrid of several programs that are out there from a forensic nursing standpoint. Austin has a program that is based out of their women's shelter. And then the District of Washington, D.C. has a program that really functions out of one of their main emergency rooms. But they're a nonprofit organization that's kind of funded by their, I guess, city or district. And so they go into one emergency room. So I kind of took those two concepts, and I really knew with our geographic size and our neighboring counties also having, like, this service was lacking all throughout our region. I knew that I had to be able to be mobile and meet patients where they were. And so I kind of took both of those concepts and really kind of blew it up. We, at the end of the month, will be responding to 21 locations. We have 2 offices, one in Richmond, one in Sugar Land. We have a 3rd opening in Montgomery County next month. We respond to various women's shelters, Houston Area Women's Center, the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, We partner with CHI, St. Luke's Hospital. We have a MOU with them to where we respond to their emergency room and see their patients that might show up there. So we really try to tackle all the elements in our community and be able to be there for the patients. And then again, being mobile and doing different types of programs to best suit those needs. So definitely is kind of a hybrid of various programs throughout the United States, but from my knowledge is quite unique in that we are a standalone forensic nursing organization. We're not supported by any other entity except for our own organization.
If I can add, we're perceived, this region is perceived as being the hub of human trafficking. So all the education that I've received, all the information I've received is that a lot of what we're doing is cutting the edge because we're on the forefront of this battle, and things like providing forensic nurses at the scenes, all this is innovative. It's something that may have been applied in other areas that we're now applying in this area. So I don't know if it's been mentioned, but we do have the assistance part of HATRA, federal government, governmental agencies, the FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, HSI, all the alphabet organizations that assist us in these investigations. So there are a lot of resources, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of technology involved in this. So we're doing everything we can, and I think I can confidently say that we're leading this fight in the nation.
Thank you.
I may have two questions because people have sent me questions to ask. So my first is to District Attorney Kim Ogg. With the Pimps Off the Streets POTS bill, which should hopefully be signed if it's not already been signed, preventing deferred adjudication for pimps who are prostituting our young girls and young women, is that going to help your office so that you can no longer ever issue like what amounts to a parking ticket citation of deferred adjudication for someone who's prostituted a young girl or a young woman?
I'm not familiar with the bill that you're talking about. Is it a bill that the governor's going to sign?
Pimps Off the Streets, and the main purpose is to help enforce. So once Commander Dale has done his job and his team has done their job, and you've done your job, the ultimate goal is we need to put these pieces of crap away and not just slap them with a small minor fine.
So I think the question is, would harsher sentencing of buyers help? And I think
sellers being the pimps. There's just been such a track record of deferred adjudication being the sentence that's handed down, and I'm just trying to understand, is it because there wasn't enough evidence, or it was just that's what they're getting? Because it just seems we're doing all of this, and in the end, these assholes are getting off. And it ticks me off and a bunch of people. And we
I
really,
get that.
yeah.
So I'm not sure how many are getting deferred adjudication, but I've provided those stats to these organizations, to some of your organizations before. Whatever my information is, we'll share, we'll be transparent about it. So I'm unfamiliar with this bill. I don't know about something that would limit the sentences or require jail time in prostitution cases. So I'd have to familiarize myself with the bill. But I would suggest that every case demands individual attention and justice. And while it's easy to say everybody ought to get X for Y crime, my job is to make sure that we do justice in each case. And that's, in my mission statement, it says for the victim, the accused, and the community. So when I suggested that the community had a responsibility to tell us what sellers and what buyers and what human traffickers should be sentenced to, that's what contested jury and court trials are all about. And the sentences that will be handed down and that have been handed down against those entities, I think what we see from that is you'll see a shape of what our community's response is, and in effect, it's the price tag. So the community ultimately will set the price on those who profit from prostitution and those who commit it, whether selling or buying. We've talked about some policies that we have that are general policies that seem to be producing better results than simply jailing prostitutes and letting the buyers go free. But I would say our office, I can't tell you that we don't let the buyers go free, but I don't know how many people get probation and don't. What I would urge you to do though is not to fall into the trap of saying, you know, every case should be treated the same, because they really can't be.
I can respond. We spent a lot of time, Kim and I, in our offices, and both of us going to Austin over this last legislative session, testifying a lot of times on human trafficking legislation. And I looked it up, I did see the House bill, I don't know how it ended up, but I can tell you that we both agree on this, is that the punishment should fit the crime. And so we're taking an aggressive stance on human trafficking, and this is a regional effort. That's why we're part of the line, so we can coordinate our efforts to make sure we can have a maximum impact on the problem.
Way in the back.
So I guess the question is, we should be attacking the demand and
Comment.
I think that's a good question for Commander Dale.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, when Chief Art Acevedo got here, he set a guideline of what he wanted. And he did state that, 10, 20 years ago, we heard of the old vice, you go out there, it was shown in the movies, arrested the woman that was engaged in prostitution, told the guys to take a hike. That's changed. Changed before I got there to the Vice Division, and going forward now, it used to be, like say, 70% women, 30% buyers. Now we're looking at, we arrest more of the buyers than we do of the women engaged in prostitution. And with the buyers, we do put their photos up in the Chronicle and our HPD Flickr page, and it's public shaming. But I know 2 cases alone, and they'll make their comments on the HPD Flickr page, and a lot of them say this is entrapment or this is BS. Vice, sucks. Chief Acevedo has bigger things to worry about. This is consensual. But what we've done now is we put their faces up there. Some of these men have come up and said, you know what? I'm trying to work it on my marriage. I've been caught. I'm trying to do something about this because now, I've been addicted. They don't do this. It's always their first time when we get them. This is the first time. I've never been. It's always their first time. But, the public shaming is one aspect of it, but these men need some help too. We've got some good organization here, not just for the victims engaged in prostitution, but for the men, the buyer side, like love people, not pixels. Coordinated by a group, a gentleman by the name of Bo, who was a former buyer. So we have those organizations as well, and now we have a John suppression initiative that we work with Cook County twice a year, where we just focus on the Johns, starting that up soon. We'll just focus on the Johns, what we call them the Johns, but we really want to call them the demand side and the buyers and things of that nature. I don't like that slang term, Johns, but that's what we're trying, that's what we're focusing on. So now it's really 70% of them and then 30% of the women. So we're really holding them accountable, and we've got some legislation that went up and make it, a little bit, stiffer penalties for the men that do this. But we also want to make sure that, hey, they're offered resources as well to get help for this, but by no means do we turn a blind eye. But it starts with you in the back. It starts with talking to our young men who believe it's okay to go to a strip club and think that those women aren't being trafficked and that they're voluntarily there. Because we've rescued a lot of women out of those places as well. So with that being said, it's imperative upon you to talk to the young men that are growing up in this day and age where sex and that kind of thing is so prevalent, and you can look at pornography sites on your cell phone like a drop of a hat. So just take a proactive approach in that. But we're on our end, we're doing that already, and Chief Acevedo, my boss, has been a big proponent for that, and he's given us our marching orders, and he's been a big supporter of our human trafficking in it, and that's a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, our incredible panel speakers today. So we know we have to prosecute, we need to gather evidence, and we need to shame and make sure this doesn't happen again. I wanted to thank the Texas Justice Center for allowing us to have this meeting here. Amir Skandari, thank you for letting us have it.